Progressive. Woodrow Wilson was a progressive. Progressivism had strong influence in both parties in the early 1900s, hence the progressive income tax. The whole idea that we can solve problems with government solutions, which means that we have to move beyond the Constitution.
All right, so Larry, if you're an originalist, if you're somebody who says, I believe in the Constitution, I believe in what the founders did, I believe in the American experience,
right,
or the experiment, can progressivism and original intent republicanism, if you will, can they survive?
No, they cannot coexist, because the concept of the progressives is that man is perfectible. We can make man here and now, not in heaven, not in some afterlife, but we can make man and society perfect today, and as a result, everything they do works toward that end. The founders all thought, man is flawed. We're flawed. Not one of the founders would have thought he was perfectible in this life, and they put in institutional safeguards.
So, okay, so hang on just a second, because this is where America, I think this is what you really have to understand. What Larry is saying here is critical to understand, because there are no safeguards. This is why progressivism or Marxism always goes bad, because you can't perfect man, so it has to become more and more brutal. And men are flawed as well, who are running it, and sometimes their ego takes control. Can we flip this? Can we flip this chalkboard? Because Thomas Jefferson talked about this very thing, and the difference, I think this would be a fundamental difference here. The two enemies of the people are criminals and government. So let us tie the second down with the chains of the Constitution, so the second will not become the legalized version of the first. That's the founders saying, you're never going to be able to perfect people. It's always going to be this way.
If you give somebody too much power, eventually that power will corrupt that person and ultimately the nation. You have to have a separation of powers according to the founders. Wilson wanted a centralization of power, because you have to centralize power in order to accomplish government programs to redistribute the wealth and improve society along the direction the progressives wanted.
Okay. So when you hear the President of the United States talk about progressivism, and then he says, I want to fundamentally transform America, I'm going to ask each of you. Larry, I'm going to start with you. What does that say to you? What does that mean to you? What is the visceral or intellectual reaction either way?
Well, my skin crawls, because it means the Constitution isn't good enough. What we have protecting our country today is not my vision of the country, and I have to get away from whatever we have today. It's dangerous and just really radical. It's the most radical thing any president has ever said.
Burton?
Well, it's the same thing, because it means that we're not going to have rule of law. We're going to have rule by men, an educated elite of men. Power will be transferred to these people, and we will be governed by a small elite.
This is the czars. This is the this company gets a bailout, but this company doesn't.
That's correct.
Right? Okay.
Exactly.
And RJ, what does it mean to you?
Well, Glenn, liberals have realized that the word liberal is a dirty word in American politics. It has been since the political debate in the 1980s. They've latched onto this idea of progressives because it sounds like a nicer word, but it also accurately reflects their view of the state.
All right. But isn't it true that progressive was a hot word? Liberal meant something entirely different around the turn of the century here in America. It meant maximum amount of freedom. It meant small government. It was more of a libertarian kind of idea. And then the progressives came in. They permeated both parties. It became popular until America saw what it was. And then it kind of really had to, it kind of had to shed the, well, people aren't really digging this. And they kind of had to go underground into the liberal thing. Then they destroyed the word liberal because it meant progressive, and then they dusted the word off progressive again and said, no, we have the answer, it's progress. Isn't this have we gone full circle here?
The term liberalism was hijacked from our founders, from the founding generation. Maybe the clearest progressive on this, Glenn, is the progressive philosopher John Dewey, who was a very influential figure in the early part of the 20th century. And he hijacked the term liberalism for the progressives. He said, well, there's the old liberalism, that's the liberalism of the Declaration of Independence, where it's about the liberty of the individual.
Two places here when we come back. I want to show you, America, how they have changed our history books and why they did that. And it goes back again to the Founding Fathers. They had to disconnect us from our Founding Fathers and the roots. And how they did that in the court system as well around 1920, and why they did that. Coming up in just a second. And that's really what progressive means. Instead of a revolution, which you'd never accept, it's an evolution. It's just slow progress. It's ever evolving. It's living. That was not the original intent with our founders, and it is really the definition of the progressive movement. We're back with R.J. Pestrito, Burton Folsom Jr., and Larry Schweikart. He is we're looking at progressives, America, and I want to go to the law here, and I want to go to R.J. RJ, help me out because my memory is a little sketchy here. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. I believe he was the head of the of Harvard Law in about 1920, and he's the guy who made a fundamental change in America. They no longer studied the Constitution or constitutional law or the founders. They changed to study case law, which again, no revolution, just evolution. So we slowly but surely keep moving away from the Constitution and the founders, and we end up just looking at the last case, right?
That's right, and I believe the fellow you're talking about is Roscoe Pound, who was dean of Harvard Law School. They're at the tail end of the progressive era, and Pound was basically someone who's responsible for applying progressive ideas to the law. And what it's called today is legal realism. That's the name of the theory or the legal philosophy. And basically what legal realism does, Glenn, is it tries to take what the Constitution says, which isn't what a lot of these judges think it needs to say, and through case law, through decisions, they apply it, they, shall we say, read it flexibly, liberally, right, and make it say what they think it needs to say. And therefore, what you look at, what you study when you study law, is not the law itself, is not the Constitution, but what other judges have said the law means.
Exactly right.
And that's why it's a case law approach. It
would be like if you're repairing or restoring a car and you never go back to the original schematic of the car, you just see all of the repairs and what everybody has done to the car. Well, a 1965 Mustang, 200 years from now, if you're only basing what you're doing on all of the repairs, it ain't going to be anything like a 1965 Mustang. Right?
That's right. And Glenn, this is why you see during the Supreme Court confirmation hearings, all of the progressive senators are really worked up about precedent. They're obsessed with precedent. What that means is they want to make sure these potential justices are going to be guided by what other liberal judges have said over the last 80 years about the Constitution, not what the Constitution actually says.
All right. Now let me go to Woodrow Wilson. Bring a picture of Woodrow Wilson up. I hate this. I had to tell you, 2 years ago, I knew nothing about Woodrow Wilson. I hate this SOB. He was an evil, evil dude. And did more. America should know about Woodrow Wilson because he, I think, has done more to change America than most presidents, in fact, a series of presidents combined. Would you agree with that?
Well, he has. You look at the Federal Reserve, the progressive income tax, but manipulating with wages and hours, that it's the government's job to determine wages that might be paid, hours of work that might be done.
But he also did all the work on administrative work, administration, right? He was the guy who wrote it before the early 1900s. And then he also was a guy who helped change history. If I'm not mistaken, it was during his administration that a group of professors, I think from Columbia, progressive professors, got together